Redditors who are now married because you didn't know how to break up with your significant other. How is it going for you? Good. I never really wanted to break up, but I didn't think I knew what love was. She was my first girlfriend. We had fun. Maybe it should have ended when college ended. It felt like a natural ending. But she bawled that she loved me so much. We carried on. Long distance. Maybe I thought I'd never get anyone else. Maybe I loved her. I wasn't sure. Things just sort of happened. We moved in together and life went on. She started talking about marriage. I was terrified but went along. She started talking about kids. I was terrified but went along. That was over 10 years ago. Married, 2 gorgeous kids, totally in love. We take couples holidays. We fill the walls with printed selfies and funny pics. We don't always have intercourse constantly. We don't always buy each other gifts. We don't stop telling each other that we saw a really hot girl guy on the train today. Turns out love is just being happy around someone, forgiving their faults. It won't always be the same as that first 6 months, and it doesn't have to be. I'm totally in love. I think I was all along. He threatened to kill himself if he left, so I didn't, and we got married. Then he threatened to kill himself if I divorced him, so I left. Not because I wanted him to do it, and believe me, I desperately want to turn this into a great joke, but because it suddenly was clear to me that I was in for an entire fricking lifetime of being afraid. So frick that, I walked, and he's still alive. For those of you where it worked out, great. But for those of you who saw this and thought that me, and you don't have kids, don't have kids, as you can see in these comments, it changes everything. That piece of paper saying you're married can be cancelled. Little humans can't be. I was lucky and got out after a couple years because we didn't do that. And I'm now married to the most amazing woman who ever lived. If you are anything less than all in with your SO, then not only should you not be thinking about creating more human beings to live in that environment, you should realize that once you do, you're locked in. Poorly. We fight a lot and it affects me in so many aspects of my life. I see a lot of that in these comments. I find myself constantly looking back at our dating history and all the times I tried to break things off but she talked me out of it, including twice while we were engaged. It's just coming up to our first year but I'm thinking of divorce already. No kids in the picture. Sorry for the sad story. Hopefully things are better next year. My husband did this, but I didn't find out until almost 20 years and 2 children later, when he told me we were getting a divorce and that he was deeply in love with a woman he met when I was pregnant with our oldest, who was, at that time, 16. I love my kids and wouldn't change that for the world, but if it were possible to do it again in some alternative timeline, I wish he'd have broken up with me. It hurt more than I could have ever imagined to find out that my entire adult life was, in essence, based on a lie. It took a lot of work for me to be able to trust anyone again. My husband's love for me was something I had always thought of as part of the foundation of the life I built. To discover that foundation was false ripped my confidence to shreds. I started second guessing every decision I made or had made in the past. I stopped trusting my own judgment about almost everything. I went from being a very intelligent, confident, independent person to something far less. We're both happier now, but I'll always wonder how things could have been better had he been willing to do the right thing back then instead of making a commitment he didn't really want simply because he didn't want to give up the fun stuff. 2 kids and divorced. Great. Actually, he's a wonderful husband and balances me out with his steadfast, caring and happy equilibrium. I'm glad we got married. I tried to break up with him a couple times because he sometimes gets on my very last nerve and because I thought it just didn't feel right. He annoys me less now, or maybe we've both gotten better at dealing with it. As far as not feeling right, I still have fleeting moments where I feel that way, and it's scary to think that I might have made a huge mistake for life. But they're outweighed by the vast majority of moments of contentment, love, and happiness. I'm a widow, and he's my second husband, so I think there will always be part of me that feels like I should still be living my first life with my first husband. But that's not possible, and this is good, so I'll take this gift and try not to be too critical. I'm definitely that guy. Even thought of it leading up the wedding like what am I doing? All because I didn't have the balls to break up with her? Then bam. Pregnant on wedding night. Now we have 2 kids, super happily married, and realized the reasons I wanted to break up with her were all really stupid, which makes sense, because generally I'm pretty stupid. She's the only person that can tolerate my personality full time, and keeps me from my constant natural inclinations to be a frick up. Turned out great for me, together for 22 years now, married for 18. She was a verified goody two shoes, and I always had a thing for bad girls, so it wasn't a great match from the start. But I was 17 and I had no other offers at the time, so I figured I'd keep going out with her until I found something better. Long story short, I never did, so I kept going through the motions. I liked her and we had fun, but I never loved her. She always said she wouldn't have intercourse with me unless she knew we would get married someday, and after 2 years I was willing to make that trade. After that I felt like I couldn't break up with her, like that kind of betrayal would ruin her life. She was deeply in love with me and I just saw her as a friend. I practiced breakup speeches all the time, all the way up to the wedding, but when I went to say the words I couldn't do it. She was too nice and sweet. I felt like it would break her, so I just decided to just man up and keep my word. We were married at 21, and the next 5 years or so were rough for both of us. I had a lot of bitterness and regret, and I kept trying to turn her into that bad girl I always wanted. Must have been a nightmare for her. Then it just hit me one day. All my friends who dated or married bad girls were miserable. Most of them got cheated on. My wife treated me like gold even though I treated her like garbage. All of a sudden I was overwhelmed with love for her. I realized I was married to the best friend I ever had. What I wanted in a woman flipped 180 degrees in a single moment, and she has been my idea of a perfect spouse ever since. I have never told her any of this and I never will. My wife and I almost certainly would have broken up if she hadn't become pregnant when we first started going out. She had severe issues with depression and was very manic, both up and down. When we first started seeing each other I thought it was a fling, but then she got pregnant and we decided that we would have an abortion. Once that decision was made I resolved that I would help her psychologically for as long as I was needed. Things got really bad for a while, but over time she was able to defeat some of her demons. All from prior to the abortion. Neither of us have ever regretted that, and we were married a few years ago. Life is now great. The depression rears its head every now and then, but we both recognize the symptoms and act to head it off before it descends too far. The stigma of mental health is the biggest issue, as my wife still feels embarrassed and ashamed a lot and has very low self-esteem, but we work every day to be a unit and face these things together. I was dating my now wife, and I was a freaking mess. Drinking a lot, depressed, schlepping my way through life. I had a cycle. 1. Find a great woman. Just to be clear, there are tons of great women out there if you look at personality and brains before looks. 2. Fall in love. 3. Become emotionally unavailable, depressed, drink too much, and leave. One night, I got arrested for being drunk and in the wrong place. My fault for being drunk. So, I spent the night in jail. I had hit bottom. My girlfriend spent the whole night looking for me, and I called her as soon as I was released. She picked me up, gave me a hug and kiss, took me home, and put me to bed. Not a mean word, just kindness and compassion. Coming from a family where these words don't exist, I was astounded that people could act like this to someone who acted so stupidly. I woke up, and she took me to get ice cream, and told me that she would be there for me through the whole process. Court date, fines etc. She stood by for the whole thing. I got sober, went on antidepressants, and asked her to marry me. I have never been so happy in my life. We were married last week. Divorced 2 years ago on Christmas Eve. Best gift I ever gave or received. Not too bad. We have 2 kids now. I mean, if I'm being honest, I don't really like anyone, but she's probably the only person I could spend the rest of my life with and not want to kill. Funny too, because we actually share very few interests. We like vastly different music, television and movies. We have opposite personalities. She's an extrovert, I'm an introvert, etc. I probably could have been happy being a lifelong bachelor, but I just know I would have turned into a giant weirdo. My idiosyncrasies would have surely evolved into full-blown eccentricities by this point without her in my life. True love. 8 years ago, I put my engagement ring in an envelope with a note, packed my bag and went to my parents' house. My mother told me she wouldn't let her daughter be a coward who ended a relationship like that and to go back and face my problems. I went back home, put my ring back on and shredded the note. Our divorce was finalized a year ago in April. I stayed with my ex-wife for 11 years until it all went to heck and she cheated on me, so I divorced her. It was like sleeping next to my sister the whole time, a disaster, all because I didn't have enough of a backbone to break up with her. I actually feel bad saying this happened to me. In college she really had her crap together, and I was a drunken, perma-baked 20-year-old animal. She studied all the time. I was a business major. We had a lot of fun, but I was unreliable, didn't want any responsibility to anyone, and she was very much the opposite. I don't feel bad about how I was. I was in college and that's the point, but it caused friction between us which I hated. So I was at a crossroads. I wanted to be with her, but it felt like it wasn't working. An enabler she is not. It seemed like I constantly let her down. So I basically wasn't the person she needed at the time, as much as I loved the crap out of her. This is pathetic, but I tried to break up with her. Like, I gave what I thought was the done speech, but didn't really have the balls to just come out and say frick this, I don't want to be with you anymore. We had a fight. I said wishy-washy passive-aggressive nonsense, and we ultimately proceeded with the relationship. I don't entirely remember, but it may have even come to her saying so we are done and I couldn't bring myself to confirm. We haven't had the easiest relationship ever, but it's one in which I feel like we've both grown a lot, though I concede it was mostly done by me. She is crazy mature. She has been the entire time I've known her. I can be, but I had to learn to be. She just seemed naturally like an impossibly good person, and she's pretty attractive. So I have absolutely no idea what she's seen in me all this time. We 100% still do not agree on everything. We are more complementary to each other, if that makes any sense. So yeah, we're really good, but we have our moments. Married 7 years now. Beautiful house. Beautiful baby girl was welcomed recently. For all of our faults, and there are many, the only constant is we're always there for each other. She is far and away my best friend. And God, that butt, though I'm sure, with a sarcastic smirk, she also thinks I'm an butt. Pretty good. Turns out we grew into the people each other needed, and are the happiest couple you've ever met in your entire life. I love her with all my heart, and couldn't imagine my life without her. Divorced. She packed up and left while I was visiting family out of state, took the dog, all my belongings, emptied out my accounts, and pretty much disappeared. Found out a few months later she was having an affair. Oh well, better for it now. I was this person for a long time. 6 years out of an 11-year marriage, 13-year relationship. We had grown apart, and despite both of us trying to change things, we were no longer the right people for each other. I wanted out, more so than her, at first, but I didn't have the courage to leave. We have a child, which complicated things, obviously. I would like to say I didn't leave because of our daughter, but that wasn't it. I was simply afraid to leave a cushy, but soul-deadening, life. I finally left. A few years later, I met an amazing woman who fills my life with fun, adventure, and joy. We are a much better fit. A few years after that, the new woman and I married. We're now in the 3rd year of our marriage, and I couldn't be happier. As for my ex-wife, she met and married a great guy that was a far better fit for her. We're all friendly, and from time to time, my new wife and I are invited over for things like holidays. If you're in an unhappy situation, make sure that it's the situation and not just you. But if it is the situation, go. You have exactly one life to live, as far as anyone can tell. And the absolute worst thing would be to regret giving up the life that you could have had for something that was safe but unhappy. I married a girl who implied she would kill herself if she was without me. I hopped on a cavalcade of abuse and infidelity for 10 years, punctuated with her stints in an institution. I was so stressed out by her that I would literally get heart palpitations before she came home from any of these stays. Luckily, I was bailed out when she fell in love with her best friend and took off. I filed for divorce, which took another year because my spiteful ex wanted to punish me by delaying her signature. Borderline personality disorder is not fun. There is a happy ending, however. The divorce finally went through, and I decided to take a little in-town vacation. I got a nice hotel room and treated myself to an elaborate dinner. When I had finished my fantastic meal, I gushed to the waiter that it was the best I'd ever eaten. She told me that the chef was available if I wanted to meet her. Being the Irish gabber that I am, I gladly accepted. A few minutes later, the chef came to my table and we had what could only be described as a love at first sight moment. I'm not even sure what we said to each other, if anything. At first, I asked if she was free after her shift and we have been together ever since. I very nearly made this mistake. Was in a relationship for 4 years, bought a house together and everything. Her and her parents were really pressuring me into proposing. Her threatening to leave if I didn't do it within a year and her parents constantly asking me when I was planning, etc. We weren't happy and hadn't been for about 2-3 years, but I just couldn't find a way out of the mess I'd created for myself. Anyway, I eventually bought a cheapish ring on a whim and decided to propose that weekend. Had absolutely minimal thought to it and I was dreading asking and the idea of getting married to this girl. Unfortunately, I asked anyway and she said yes, and then she turned into a complete bridezilla. She was bad before and this just made her worse. I immediately realized I made a mistake and tried my best to find a way out of it in the easiest way possible. Tried to break up with her about a week after proposing and she refused to let me, ringing her mum crying about halfway through and telling her everything. I felt really bad, so said we'd work on it. I freaked out, what have you. Fast forward 2 weeks and we ended up going on holiday with her parents and it was a living nightmare. Her mum is a full-blown very stupid, incredibly racist and massively stuck in her ways, and her dad was just absolutely spineless. I realized that if I actually went through with the marriage that I would end up exactly like that, and that broke me. I broke up with her there and then. 3 days into a 2-week holiday that was too expensive for me to leave, so I had to wait it out. That month I was engaged for was the worst of my entire life, and every day since has been like an entirely new life. God knows how much worse it would have been if I'd have gone through with it, but I'm so glad that I finally grew some balls and ended it. Great. I work all the time, and she does nothing. And, by nothing, I mean she yells at me and the kids all day. If she weren't around, we'd have no one to yell at us and point out all the things we do wrong on a daily basis. It's like I am paying someone to be my aggressive life coach. Our relationship wasn't going well. She lived in Bristol and I lived in Croydon. I decided that the best thing to save our swiftly sinking relationship was to propose. I took her for a romantic getaway in the Quantox to pop the question. My flatmate came for moral support, along with his junkie friend, who was trying to go cold turkey. The weekend went very poorly, and I began to realize she wasn't the one for me. I had a long chat with my flatmate and realized I didn't have to get married. It felt so good finally realize that. I was on my way to end it with her when she told me she found the engagement ring in my bag. She said yes, she wanted to get married. Out of embarrassment, I agreed. We divorced shortly after I jilted her at the altar. Working with her was a bit awkward after that. You have been visited by the Wisdom Papa. Type study well Papa or you will fail your next test at school. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.